My husband skipped our son's birthday for his ex's wedding, then I discovered the secret baby they lost together. My husband James and I have been married for 3 years, and we just celebrated our son's first birthday last weekend. We've been planning the party for weeks, and I was genuinely excited. Nothing huge, just a sweet little get-together with our families and a few close friends. Then, about 2 weeks before the party, James mentioned that his high school ex, Chelsea, was getting married. Apparently, the wedding was scheduled for the exact same day as our son's birthday celebration. At first, I assumed he was just bringing it up because he felt a bit nostalgic or maybe disappointed about missing it. I understood he and Chelsea had dated for 6 or 7 years through high school and remained friends after. But then he told me he wanted to go. I was completely caught off guard. I mean, how could he even consider skipping our son's first birthday to attend someone else's wedding, especially someone he used to be in love with? James told me Chelsea had personally invited him and really wanted him there, saying he had been a big part of her life. He said he felt like he owed it to her to be there on her big day. I reminded him that our son's first birthday should come first, and that Chelsea would probably understand if he couldn't make it because, well, he has a family now. That's when he got quiet and admitted he had already RSVP'd and told her he was going. He didn't want to back out. I straight up asked him if he was seriously thinking about missing our baby's first birthday party just to go to his ex's wedding. And he said it wasn't just any ex, that Chelsea was different, and I wouldn't get it. So I asked what made her so special, and James started talking about how they had a deep connection and how she'd supported him through some really dark times. He said he just wanted to be there for her now, the way she had been there for him back then. I told him, as calmly as I could, that I didn't care about their special connection. He had a wife and a child now, and we should be his priority. But he shot back that I was being unreasonable, and that the birthday party would go on just fine without him. Our son was too young to remember any of it anyway. I was so furious I couldn't even get the words out. I walked away because I knew if I kept going, I'd say something I couldn't take back. The next few days were painfully tense. James kept bringing up the wedding, insisting I should try to understand how important it was to him. He said Chelsea didn't have much family and needed her friends for support. I kept telling him that our son needed his dad at his first birthday, and that I needed my husband to help me host and celebrate our little boy. But it felt like Chelsea's feelings were taking priority over mine, and that realization just crushed me. When the day came, James went to the wedding. He didn't show up to the party at all. I had to tell both our families why he wasn't there. I couldn't bear the embarrassment, so I lied and said there was a last-minute work emergency. The party itself turned out really nice. Our son had a blast. But the whole time, I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that my husband was somewhere else, celebrating with another woman on one of the biggest days in our child's life. James didn't get home until around midnight, and he was in an annoyingly great mood. He walked in talking nonstop about how stunning Chelsea looked in her dress, how lovely the ceremony was, how much fun the reception had been. He said she looked so happy, and that she thanked him over and over for coming. According to him, it meant the world to her that he showed up. I asked him flat out if he had a good time, and he said yeah, he was glad he went. He even said it was such a special day and he wouldn't have missed it for anything. Then he went on to say how Chelsea's new husband seemed like a really decent guy, and that he was genuinely happy for her. She deserved someone who'd treat her well. That's when I told him I'd be filing for divorce in the morning. James looked stunned and asked why I was being so dramatic over one wedding. I told him it wasn't just one wedding. It was about him choosing another woman over his own wife and child, and not even recognizing how wrong that was. He said I was blowing things out of proportion, that Chelsea was just a friend, and that he would have regretted not going to her wedding for the rest of his life. So I asked if he'd regret missing his own son's birthday. He went quiet for a second, then said our son would have plenty more birthdays, but Chelsea was only getting married once. And that, right there, was the moment I knew. I told him that was the entire problem. He clearly valued Chelsea more than he did his own family. He tried to argue that I was twisting his words, but the truth had already settled in. The next day, I called a divorce lawyer and started the process. I realized that as long as Chelsea was in the picture, James would never fully choose us. And I wasn't willing to keep living like that. Since then, James has been trying to talk me out of it. He's been saying he'll cut Chelsea off if that's what it takes. But honestly, it's too late. The damage is done, and my trust is gone. I don't want to live the rest of my life wondering whether my husband will pick me and our child or someone else whenever he's asked to choose. When James and I first started dating, his mom, Emily, already sensed he wasn't fully over Chelsea. She told me that sometimes, just hearing Chelsea's name or seeing something that reminded him of her would make James zone out, like he was drifting somewhere far away in his mind. Emily admitted that she had really hoped marriage and a baby would finally help James close that chapter for good. But after what happened with the wedding, she realized those feelings for Chelsea had never really gone away, they were just buried. I asked her why she never warned me, why she didn't say anything sooner. She said she'd always hoped James would figure it out himself, that he'd let go of the past on his own. She didn't want to interfere in our marriage unless she absolutely had to. She said she felt guilty now, especially seeing how things turned out. She had genuinely believed James loved me enough to prioritize our life together over anything that came before. But she admitted she had been wrong. Emily told me, point blank, that she supported my decision to go through with the divorce. She said I was doing the right thing, not just for me, but for our son. We both deserved someone who would love us first, without hesitation or conflict. She said she was disappointed in James for letting his unresolved emotions sabotage his marriage. She had even told him that herself, but said it didn't seem like he truly understood the damage he was causing. Then she asked something I hadn't expected, if she could still be part of the baby's life. She said being his grandmother was something she cherished, and she didn't want the divorce to take that away. I told her she didn't need to worry. I would never keep her from her grandson. None of this was her fault, and I wanted our son to have a relationship with her no matter what happened between me and James. We sat there for nearly 2 hours, just talking. Emily ended up sharing stories about James and Chelsea, stuff I hadn't heard before. It helped me understand why James was still so emotionally tied to her. Apparently, Chelsea had been his whole world back when they were younger. They were together all through high school and even into their early college years. James had genuinely thought she was the one. Something had happened between them during college that ended things, but Emily wouldn't say what. She said that if I really wanted to know, I should ask James directly. Even though parts of our conversation were painful, I walked away from that lunch feeling strangely validated. Everything I had been sensing in my gut, that James's heart wasn't fully in our marriage, it wasn't just in my head. Before we parted, Emily gave me a hug. She told me James had been lucky to have me, and she hoped he would realize what he lost before it was too late. But she also said she wouldn't blame me if I didn't wait around for him to figure it out. Update 2. James came by last Sunday to spend time with the baby. And after that talk with Emily, I knew I couldn't keep ignoring the truth. I needed to finally ask James the question that had been weighing on me for months. He was on the floor playing with our son, who was giggling and trying to pull his glasses off. Normally that moment would have made me smile. But this time, I just felt this heaviness in my chest. This wasn't the life I'd imagined for us. When the baby went down for his nap, I told James we needed to talk. I said I wasn't letting him leave until we had a real, honest conversation about Chelsea, no more skirting around the issue. He immediately looked uneasy. He told me we'd already talked about everything, that he'd said sorry for missing the birthday and even offered to cut Chelsea off. He thought that should be enough. I told him his mother had come to see me, and that she'd opened up about how deeply devastated he'd been when Chelsea left him back in college. That she never believed he truly moved on. James's whole expression changed when I brought up his mom. He asked what exactly she had told me. I said just enough to confirm that what he had with Chelsea wasn't some casual friendship, it was something deeper. So I asked him the question I'd been afraid to say out loud, was he still in love with her? He didn't answer. Instead, he went silent and started running his hands through his hair, like he always does when he's stressed out or trying to come up with the right words. I told him I wasn't there to argue. I wasn't going to yell or get dramatic. I just wanted the truth. Because I couldn't move forward until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. Finally, after what felt like forever, James said he loves me and he loved our family, but that yes, he still had feelings for Chelsea. Feelings he couldn't seem to shake, no matter how badly he wanted to. He said it wasn't fair to me, and that he hated himself for it. But Chelsea had been such a massive part of his life that the feelings didn't just disappear after we got married. I asked if he thought about her often, and he said yes. Even during random everyday moments, watching TV, walking through the grocery store, his mind would wander to her. He'd wonder what she was doing or remember something they'd shared. He told me he had genuinely tried to let go. But whenever she texted or called, it all came flooding back. James was clear that he had never cheated on me physically, and that he never would. But he admitted he couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. It was eating him up. He said he thought going to Chelsea's wedding might finally give him closure. But instead, seeing her glowing and happy made everything harder. It brought those feelings roaring back stronger than ever. I asked if he thought Chelsea felt the same. He said he wasn't sure, but that she'd told him she missed him, that her new husband didn't understand her the way he did. He said that when the wedding ended, she gave him a long hug, and as she was pulling away, she whispered that she'd always love him. That shook him. I told James the first appreciated his honesty. But hearing that only confirmed what I'd already known, this marriage couldn't survive while he still had part of his heart wrapped up in someone else. He broke down crying, saying he didn't want to lose me or the baby. That he would do anything to fix this. He suggested couples therapy, saying maybe it would help him work through those old emotions and refocus on us. But I told him I didn't think therapy could fix a divided heart. You can't force yourself to fall out of love. And I couldn't keep pretending I was okay with being second place in my own marriage. Then I asked the one question I couldn't let go of: if Chelsea left her husband and said she wanted to be with him, would he go? He froze. Didn't speak for a long time. Then quietly said he didn't know and hoped he'd never be put in that position. And that was it. I told him that not knowing was already an answer. I couldn't stay married to someone who wasn't sure he'd choose me. He left that night looking completely shattered. And he hasn't contacted me since to try and change my mind. Since that night, James hasn't reached out again. And honestly, that silence told me everything I needed to know. He understood I was right. Our marriage couldn't be salvaged. After our last conversation, I actually felt a strange sense of relief. At least now I wasn't stuck wondering. I had my answer. I knew the truth, and I could stop second-guessing my decision. Update 3. 3 days ago, James called. His voice was tense, shaky. He said there was something important, something he should have told me long ago about him and Chelsea. And before I finalized the divorce, he needed me to hear it. I told him I didn't think there was anything left to say that would change how I felt. But he insisted this wasn't about changing my mind, it was about helping me understand why he still felt so connected to her. Later that evening, after I'd put the baby down for the night, James came over. He looked rough, eyes red, face drawn, like he hadn't been sleeping at all. He sat on the couch, took a deep breath, and said he was about to tell me something he'd never shared with anyone except his parents. He said I deserved the full truth, no matter how hard it was to talk about. That's when he told me that he and Chelsea weren't just high school sweethearts, they had actually been engaged during their second year of college. They were planning to get married right after graduation. By then, they'd already been together for nearly 6 years. Their families had assumed they'd be together forever, and James said he never doubted that either. To him, she was the one. Then, during their junior year, Chelsea got pregnant. James said they were scared at first but ultimately excited. They'd always talked about having kids someday, and this just came a little sooner than expected. They spent months preparing, picking out names, decorating a nursery in the little off-campus apartment they shared, trying to picture what life would look like as young parents. But then everything changed. At 32 weeks pregnant, they were driving to a doctor's appointment. James had been running late after work, and it was pouring outside. He admitted he was speeding, trying to make up for lost time. He took a turn too fast on the slick road, lost control of the car, and they slammed into a tree. Chelsea was badly injured. She went into early labor, and their baby girl was born prematurely that night. She was tiny, too small, too fragile, and after fighting for 3 days, she passed away. James said Chelsea needed surgery for her injuries and was in the hospital for nearly 2 weeks. During that time, she refused to speak to him. She blamed him for the accident, for the death of their daughter. When she was finally discharged, she didn't go home with him. She moved back in with her parents and cut off all contact. He tried to reach her, calls, letters, everything, but she wanted nothing to do with him. The grief and guilt were just too heavy. A few months later, Chelsea finally agreed to meet. They sat together, cried, talked about their daughter. James said Chelsea told him she still loved him, but that being around him was too painful. Every time she saw his face, it reminded her of the moment they lost their baby. Before she moved across the country, they made a promise. No matter where life took them, they would always be there for each other. Because no one else could ever understand the depth of what they'd gone through. They owed it to each other and to their daughter's memory. From then on, whenever one of them struggled, when a date, a sound, or a memory triggered the grief, they'd reach out. Sometimes it was her. Sometimes it was him. But they never broke that promise. Even as they moved on with other people, even after getting married to others, that connection never fully faded. I asked him if Chelsea knew about me and the baby. James said yes, she knew he was married and had a son. But she also knew that if she ever needed him, he'd be there. Because that promise still stood. He told me that when Chelsea said she was getting married, she asked him to come because it felt like the final step in her healing. She wanted someone who had been there through the worst to witness her moving forward. James admitted he knew it was wrong to skip our son's birthday for her wedding. He knew it was a bad decision. But he said he felt like he owed it to Chelsea and to their daughter's memory to be there for her one last time. He said he never told me about the engagement or their baby because it was too painful. He didn't want to reopen those wounds. And more than anything, he didn't want me to feel like I was competing with someone who wasn't even alive. I sat there feeling so many things at once: sadness for him, for Chelsea, for their baby. I finally understood why that bond between them was so deep. It wasn't just emotional, it was built on unimaginable loss. But I was also hurt. Deeply hurt. He had kept this massive part of his past from me. He had made promises to another woman, promises that directly impacted our marriage, without ever telling me. I told him I was sorry for everything he and Chelsea had gone through. I couldn't even imagine losing a child like that. But none of it changed the reality we were living in now. Because no matter how tragic the past was, the fact remained he wasn't emotionally present in our marriage. James said he understood. But he also admitted he didn't know how to let go of Chelsea completely. She had been a part of the most traumatic and defining experience of his life. I asked him, point blank, if he thought Chelsea still had romantic feelings for him. He said he believed she probably did. But they both knew they couldn't ever be together again. There was too much pain between them. He said that going to her wedding made him realize how stuck he still was. Seeing her smiling and moving on while he still clung to the past was jarring. And maybe that's why he'd held on to their bond for so long, because he hadn't figured out how to move on himself. Then he asked me something I didn't expect. He asked if knowing all of this changed anything. I told him yes, but not in the way he might hope. It helped me understand him better, but it also confirmed that divorce was the right choice. There was simply too much emotional baggage for this marriage to ever be healthy. I told him he needed time to really process his grief and sort through his feelings for Chelsea before he could give himself fully to anyone. And I couldn't keep putting my life on hold while he figured that out. James nodded slowly. He said he was sorry for putting me in such an impossible position. He told me he hoped that someday, somehow, he'd find peace and finally be able to let go. I told him I hoped that too. For his sake, and for our son. I told James that I didn't blame him for loving Chelsea, or for grieving the child they lost. How could I? That kind of pain runs deep. But I also made it clear that I couldn't keep sacrificing my own happiness or our son's stability just so he could sort through feelings he should have worked out years ago. We sat in silence for a while after that. There wasn't really anything else to say. Then James stood up and said he should probably let me get some sleep since I had work early the next morning. He gave me a hug and whispered, "Thank you for listening to everything, and for not judging me." I told him I could never judge someone for mourning their child. I was just sorry he'd carried all that pain by himself for so long. After he left, I felt completely drained, like I had nothing left in me emotionally. But at the same time, there was relief. For the first time, I finally understood the full picture. All the confusion, the tension in our marriage, it all made sense now. Update 4. A lot of people have been messaging me asking what happened next, so here's where things stand. James and I met one final time with our lawyers to go over the divorce paperwork and work out custody for our son. Thankfully, since we hadn't been married long and didn't own property or have joint investments, it wasn't too complicated. My attorney had everything prepared ahead of time, and James' lawyer reviewed it and agreed that it was fair. We agreed that I'd have primary custody, since I'm still breastfeeding and the baby is with me most of the time. James would have him every other weekend, one evening a week, alternating holidays, and 2 weeks each summer once our son is older. He also has open visitation if he gives me a heads up. We split our savings account down the middle. I kept the car since I needed it to get to work and take the baby to appointments. James agreed to keep paying for my health insurance through his job until the end of the year, just to give me time to settle into my new job. He also agreed to pay monthly child support. It's not a huge amount, but it's enough to help with daycare and some other expenses. Once the legal stuff was wrapped up and the lawyers stepped out, James asked if we could talk privately for a minute before heading back to work. I agreed, even though I thought we'd already said everything that needed saying. James started crying almost immediately. He told me he was sorry for everything. For hurting me, for hurting our son, and for making the choices he did. He said he knew now that I was right. He had been emotionally unavailable and had put Chelsea ahead of his own family. And he hated himself for it. Then he told me something unexpected. He'd called Chelsea after our last conversation and told her they couldn't stay in touch anymore. That he needed to close that door for good. He said Chelsea had been emotional, that she cried, but ultimately she understood. She told him she never meant to come between us, and that she hoped he could be happy with me and their son. I asked him what exactly she'd said. He told me she said she'd miss him, but that she knew cutting ties was the right thing. She told him she'd always love him in some way, but that maybe it was time for both of them to stop living in the past and let go for real. James looked me in the eye and begged me for another chance. He said he'd go to therapy, work through his grief, do anything it took to prove that I came first now. He promised to finally let go of Chelsea and be fully present in our marriage. I told him I appreciated the steps he was taking. Cutting contact with Chelsea, admitting his mistakes, it all mattered. But it didn't fix what was already broken. Too much damage had been done. I told him that even if he never spoke to Chelsea again, I'd still live with the doubt. I'd always wonder if he was thinking about her, missing her, comparing me to what they had. And I couldn't live like that, not as a wife constantly questioning whether she's someone's second choice. James said he understood. He said he knew rebuilding trust would take time, but he was ready to fight for it. He told me missing our son's first birthday for that wedding was the biggest mistake of his life, and he would spend forever trying to make up for it if I gave him the chance. Then he asked me one last time if there was anything he could do to change my mind. And I told him no. My decision was made. I needed him to respect that and stop trying to convince me to stay. I said we could still be good co-parents, and maybe even friends someday. But I couldn't be his wife anymore. I deserved to be with someone who wasn't emotionally tied to someone else, someone who could love me without reservation. James looked completely crushed when I said that. He nodded and said he understood, and that he was sorry for putting me in this situation. He told me he hoped that one day, I could forgive him for breaking up our family. I told him I didn't hate him. That I understood his feelings for Chelsea were complicated because of the trauma they'd shared. But just because I understood didn't mean it was any easier to live with. We hugged goodbye. James told me he would always love me. That he was grateful for the time we'd had and especially for our son. He promised to be the best father he could be, even if he couldn't be the husband I needed him to be. I told him I loved him too. But sometimes, love isn't enough, not when two people want different things or carry different wounds. And I told him that more than anything, I hoped he would finally find peace with his past, because without that, none of us could really move forward.